Well, hello again. Today I'd like to talk about Suematsu Kencho, Baron Suematsu. My interest in him started with this book by Professor Matsumura, Portsmouth Enomichi, which it's The Road to Portsmouth, which I translated with his permission, his kind permission, into this book, Baron Suematsu in Europe during the Russo-Japanese War, 1904 to 1905, his battle with Yellow Peril. And I also wrote a chapter in Britain and Japan Biographical Portraits, Volume 5, about Suematsu. I have already, on a different video, read part of the translation, so I can refer to that in the description, but today I want to read the text, not including the endnotes, of my chapter 6 of Britain and Japan Biographical Portraits, Volume 5, and the title is Suematsu Kencho, 1855 to 1920, statesman, bureaucrat, diplomat, journalist, poet, and scholar. And there's a small portrait of Suematsu right there on the page. You can see him. Okay, so here we go. Suematsu Kencho has been described as a second ranker in the Meiji era, and indeed his name is not well known in Japan nowadays. This is partly because the front-ranking Meiji leaders were 10 or 20 years his senior, partly because of his humble non-samurai background, and because he was born outside the 4 restoration fiefs of Satsuma, Choshu, Tosa, and Hizen. Baron Suematsu also died relatively young, aged 65, and suffered ill health, including high blood pressure. Nevertheless, he headed the second tier, received recognition and patronage from the Meiji Genro, elder statesmen, and made prolific and significant contributions in many areas which deserve to be remembered today. Early life in Japan. Suematsu Kencho was born on the 30th of September 1855, the 20th of August in the second year of Ansei by the old calendar, in the hamlet of Maeda, then part of Miyako-gun in Buzen, and still now a farming village on a fertile plain within the city of Yukuhashi, Fukuoka Prefecture. In fact, it's quite close to where I'm living in Kee-tah-kew-shoo. Quite easy to reach it. His father, Suematsu Shichiuemon, was an important village headman, Daishoya, and his mother's name was Nobuko. When he was a child, he was first called Senmatsu, then Kenichiro, and eventually settled on Kencho, which for a while he thought should be read as Norizumi. Kencho was the 4th son. From the age of 10, in August 1865, he was sent to the nearby private school, Juku, of the renowned scholar and poet Murakami Bussan, 1810 to 1879, called the Suisai-en, founded in 1835, where he studied Chinese classics, Kangaku. In 1866, the pro-shogunate Kokura clan's territory was attacked by the Choshu army, and the Suematsu family home was burnt to the ground. Kencho was sent to relatives in neighboring Tagawa-gun, from where Murakami brought him back to Suisai-en. In 1871, there being little future at home, Suematsu Kencho went up to Tokyo at the age of 17. He was taken in as a houseboy by the high government official Sasaki Takayuki, 1830 to 1910, of Tosa. And while there, he met and became a friend of Takahashi Korekio, 1854 to 1936, the future president of the Bank of Japan, finance minister, and briefly prime minister. Takahashi taught Suematsu English in exchange for lessons on the Chinese classics. In May 1872, Suematsu was enrolled at the Tokyo Shihan Gakko, Tokyo Normal School, but soon left on Takahashi's advice because his progress in English was so rapid. This caused a rift with the Sasaki household, recorded in Takahashi's autobiography. Then Suematsu and Takahashi tried selling English translations of foreign newspapers and magazines to make a living, and eventually the Nipposha bought them. In 1874, Suematsu joined the Nipposha Company. The chief editor, novelist and dramatist Fukuchi Geiichiro, 1841 to 1906, soon recognized Suematsu's journalistic talent and added him to the editorial staff of the Tokyo Nichi-Nichi Shimbun, founded that year. Apart from his real name, Suematsu also used the pen name of Sasanami Hyoji. In January 1876, he was appointed a commissioner in the central office of the Council of State, Sein Goyo Kakari, and accompanied the envoys Kuroda Kiyotaka, 1840 to 1900, and Inoue Kaoru, 1835 to 1915, to Korea after a Japanese surveying ship, the Unyo, had been fired on. There he helped in drafting the unequal Treaty of Kanghua of 26 February 1876. Suematsu's newspaper articles criticizing the Meiji leaders, Genroin Hihan, and calling for the abolition of the Ministry of Educational Affairs, Kyomusho Haishiron, attracted the attention of the great Choshu men Ito Hirobumi, 1841 to 1909, and General Yamagata Aritomo, 1838 to 1922, on whose staff he served as an adjutant during the Satsuma Rebellion of 1877. Another article comparing rickshaw-men to oxen and calling for their early replacement by trains and horses, Jinriksha Bo Kokuron, caught the eye of educationalist Matsumoto Mannen, 1815 to 1880. In England, 1878 to 1886. Having already entered the world of officialdom with his trip to Korea, on the 29th of January 1878, Suematsu was ordered to go to England to be apprentice first secretary at the Japanese legation in London, with an additional order from the Office of Historiography, Shushikan, on the 9th of February to research English and French historical methods in his spare time. It was probably at the recommendation of Ito Hirobumi that he was chosen from many candidates. Suematsu left Yokohama by ship on the 10th of February, sailing via the Suez Canal, completed in 1869. He reached Marseille on the 26th of March and traveled overland to Calais, arriving in London's Victoria Station at 6 p.m. on the 1st of April, 1878. He soon obtained lodgings in a well-to-do English household, giving details in letters to his family. He also told them about London theatre visits, an audience with Queen Victoria, and the first visit of a Japanese warship to Britain in July 1878, the sloop Seiki, built at Yokosuka. Much more of the next 8 years is revealed in the long letters written by Suematsu to his powerful patron Ito Hirobumi. Still in his mid-20s, Suematsu was apparently more interested in foreign travel and the chance to study in Britain than in a serious diplomatic career. And it has been suggested that he was sent to Britain by Ito partly as his informant on the political situation in Britain and Europe. Indeed, Suematsu had no particular duties at the legation, which was small and not busy. The surviving letters to Ito cover mainly the years 1878 to 79 and 1881 to 82. The first one from England is dated the 24th of April, 1878. It begins with the Balkan conflict and the British government's budget and moves on to report on the Japanese envoy Ueno Kagenori, 1844 to 88, who had been criticized for spending too much and not reporting back to Japan often enough. Suematsu defends Ueno and concludes that he should not be replaced, though in fact he was recalled in 1879 and succeeded by Mori Arinori. And here at this point there is a photograph of the members of the Japanese legation. Can you see that? Good. And the caption for that is, in the garden of the Japanese legation in Notting Hill, London, between April 1878 and June 1879. Suematsu is on the far right in the back row. Ueno Kagenori, minister in London, 1874 to 79, is in the center of the front row. Okay, just take another quick look at it. There we are. Okay. In a letter dated 10th of June 1879, Suematsu wrote of his hope to enter Cambridge University in the spring of 1880, but he did not do so until the following year. In 1879, Suematsu switched from training to be first secretary to the lower rank of third secretary and was eventually discharged from the diplomatic service at his request, and presumably with Ito's blessing, in December 1880. Suematsu matriculated at Cambridge as a non-collegiate student in October 1881. A letter of introduction by an MA of the university was necessary to do this, and the brilliant student Kikuchi Dairoku, 1855 to 1917, was the only qualified Japanese at the time. When working as a journalist, Suematsu had previously got to know Kikuchi's younger brother, the zoologist Mitsukuri Kakichi, 1857 to 1909, and arranged for him to send letters from America, the first ever letters from a foreign correspondent to a Japanese newspaper. So it was probably this connection which was used. As for Kikuchi and Suematsu, there's also my translation of Noboru Koyama's book about the Japanese students at Cambridge, which I have introduced in another video. In those days, there was no special exemption for Asian students from Latin or Greek in the Cambridge preliminary examination called Little Go, and also including mathematics. And in a letter to Ito dated 12th of May, 1882, Suematsu confessed that he found both languages very difficult and was briefly in despair. For unlike Kikuchi Dairoku, who had been schooled in England at University College School, he had never studied classics, but in June 1882, he managed to pass the examination with a second class. In the following June, he passed the second part of the exam in geometry and algebra with the same result. Suematsu was admitted to St. John's College, the college of his senpai Kikuchi, as a pensioner in October 1883. He financed his studies partly through a loan of £300 from the London branch of Mitsui and Company, sanctioned by Ito, and partly through tutoring his fellow student Maeda Toshitake, for which he received £16 per month, which was enough to cover his food and clothing. Suematsu sat the law tripos exam in May 1884 and passed at the head of the third class. For this, he was awarded the LLB, Bachelor of Laws degree, in December 1884, and also later the LLM on payment of a modest fee in 1888. LLM, that's Master of Laws. By a quirk of the Cambridge system, he also received a BA awarded together with his LLB. Of Suematsu's life as a student, we know that he was a regular speaker at the Cambridge Union from October 1882 to June 1884, when he left the university. He also carried a motion in his college debating society that party government is injurious to the best interests of the state. Here he must have polished his English and acquired the debating skills which later made him a formidable advocate of the Japanese case in the Russo-Japanese War. That he had a lively sense of humor is illustrated by an anecdote told to the Japan Society of London on the 11th of January 1905 by H.J. Edwards, then Dean of Peterhouse, in a lecture entitled Japanese Undergraduates at Cambridge University. On the towing path, among the rowing men of his college who wore the familiar scarlet jackets that have added the word blazer to the English language, Suematsu, that's S-U-Y-E-M-A-T-Z, after which sick has been written, since it's not the spelling, the normal spelling. Suematsu appeared in a brilliant but unknown uniform. "What club does that blazer represent?" asked the men of Scarlet. The answer came, "Admirable and ingenious. Club? Suematsu Club. I invented it myself." Edwards added that Suematsu was remembered by contemporaries as a man of ready speech and merry mood with an attractive spark of originality. Suematsu was also engaged in writing while in England. In 1879, Meiji Teppeki-shū, a collection of Chinese poems written during the Satsuma Rebellion of 1877, was published, and then his first attempt in English, The Identity of the Great Conqueror Genghis Khan with the Japanese hero Yoshitsune, published by W.H. and L. Collingridge, London, dealing with the Japanese legend that Genghis and Yoshitsune were the same person, a theory which fascinated Suematsu, though the evidence was inconclusive. This historical thesis, in inverted commas, was printed at Suematsu's own expense and translated into Japanese. Translations of the English poets Thomas Gray, Byron, and Shelley followed. Suematsu's most famous translation, however, was of part of Murasaki Shikibu's classic novel Genji Monogatari. This was the first English translation, predating those by Arthur Waley, 6 volumes, 1925 to 1932, Edward Seidensticker, 1978, and Royal Tyler, 2002. It was published by Trubner of London in 1882 as Genji Monogatari, the most celebrated of the classical Japanese romances, and is still available today in paperback, Tuttle 2000. A testimony to its enduring value and readability. Suematsu, in his introduction to the 1900 annotated edition, describes the romance of Genji as a national treasure, and Lady Murasaki as one of the most talented women that Japan has ever produced. He nevertheless felt that the thread of the story was diffuse and somewhat disjointed, and that the work was too voluminous. Hence, he only reproduced the first 17 of 54 chapters. On the 23rd of April, 1881, Suematsu gave a lecture in a London hotel to the Liberal Society entitled The Policy of the Japanese Government. He did not hesitate to criticize the government's financial policies or to touch on the thorny issue of treaty revision, then the top priority of Japanese diplomacy, both in his lecture and in his letters to Ito. Presciently, he expressed concern about the formation of the Kempei military police in that year, which of course later we know as the Kempei Tai, dreaded Kempei Tai, and the state polity being thus put in a state of siege. The talk was, however, not popular with his compatriots, and Tomita Tetsunosuke, a former fellow member of the legation, wrote warning Suematsu that he was endangering his career prospects. In a letter to Ito dated 13th of September 1882, Suematsu mentions advice from Mori Arinori that he was too rash and outspoken, and that he had better abandon hopes of a political career and become a historian, which dismayed him. After graduating in June 1884, Suematsu stayed in England for almost a further 2 years. Between September 1884 and February 1885, an essay on poetry and music, Kagakuron, appeared in several issues of the Tokyo Nichi-Nichi Shimbun. It was written in a private capacity, criticizing officials for failing to take any interest in Japanese poetry, and argued that it had suffered for almost 1,000 years from a debilitating and well-nigh fatal loss of musical qualities. Suematsu was thus a pioneer in campaigning for reform of Japanese poetry in the Meiji period. In any event, it is clear that Suematsu's first period in England was excellent preparation, not only for his subsequent career in Japan, but also for his time in England as Japan's special emissary to the court of St. James, 1904 to 1905. It gave him not only a chance to acquire Western knowledge, but also a new awareness of being Japanese. In Japan, 1886 to 1903. In March 1886, Suematsu was appointed councillor, Sanjikan, at the Ministry of Education and returned to Japan. In April, he was transferred to the Ministry of the Interior, and in March 1887, he was promoted to head of the Prefectural Government Bureau, Kenji Kyokucho. At this time, Ito was Prime Minister for the first time, and Yamagata was Minister of the Interior. One of Suematsu's first achievements in this role was to approach Shibusawa Eiichi, 1840 to 1931, on behalf of a local consortium regarding finance for the construction of the port of Moji as a vital staging post between Nagasaki and Tokyo. The Moji Port Construction Company was founded in 1889, and the port was completed in 1897. On his return, Suematsu also began to campaign for improvements in Japanese drama based chiefly on the London theatre. He led the drama reform movement and founded the Engeki Kairyokai, Theatre Reform Society, to eliminate obscene and indecent practices and to cause the virtual abandonment of kabuki drama. Traditional theatre buildings and stage design, together with traditional types of play, dramatic literary styles, production methods, and acting techniques were to be replaced by an uncompromisingly Western form of drama. Suematsu's iconoclastic approach to kabuki, which he regarded as shallow and showy, attracted opposition from dramatists Tsubo Uchi Shoyo, 1859 to 1935, Mori Ogai, 1862 to 1922, and Fukuzawa Yukichi, 1835 to 1901. The main members of the Theatre Reform Society were Fukuchi Genichiro, who had campaigned for theatre reform in his newspaper, and the drama critic Yoda Gakkai, 1833 to 1909. The politicians Ito Hirobumi, Inoue Kaoru, and Mori Arinori, the businessman Shibusawa Eiichi, and the actors Morita Kanya, the 12th, 1846 to 1897, and Ichikawa Danjuro, the 9th, 1838 to 1903. But in 1887, the reform campaign petered out, partly a victim of association with the unsuccessful Rokumeikan diplomacy pursued by Ito and Inoue. The main positive outcome was a new theatre building for Western drama, the Imperial Theatre, Teikoku Gekijo, which eventually opened in Marunouchi, Tokyo in 1911. Yes, the Rokumeikan was a special hall built by the design of Josiah Konda to hold Western-style dances and show how the Japanese elite was on a par with Western elites. On the 7th of June, 1888, Suematsu was amongst the first in Japan to be awarded a doctorate in literature for his translation of Genji Monogatari. On the 22nd of April, 1889, he married Ito's second adopted daughter, Ikuko. He was 35, she was just 22. To the criticism that a former member of the Kokura clan had married into the enemy Choshu clan, Suematsu responded with his customary wit that he had taken a hostage. After the wedding, the couple went together from Tokyo to Yamaguchi, which was reported in the Tokyo Nichi-Nichi Shimbun of 3rd of May as the first ever Japanese honeymoon. They had 2 children. In Japan's first general election in 1890, Suematsu was elected to the House of Representatives from his native Buzen in Kyushu. He resigned from the Interior Ministry when the Diet opened in November and continued as a member of the House until 1894. He gave an interesting talk of uncertain date on the 1890 election based on statistical tables he had compiled from the census of the 31st of December 1888 and his personal impressions gathered during the campaign. He was surprisingly critical of the Genro, the elders, who had been in power since the Restoration, many of whom were his mentors and later colleagues, writing with severity, "As it is the custom of the world to tire of old faces, they had naturally incurred both the jealousy and hatred of certain groups of citizens." Despite this, Suematsu was made a baron in 1895 and an imperial appointee to the House of Peers, Kizokuin, the following year. In 1898, Suematsu was appointed Minister of Communications in Ito's 3rd cabinet, January to June 1898. He also began work on the compilation of the Bocho Kaitenshi, an important source for the history of the Bakumatsu and Meiji Restoration, centered on the Mori family and the old Choshu provinces of Suo, Boshu, and Nagato, Choshu. Suematsu was the editor-in-chief recommended to Inoue Kaoru by Ito with a staff of about 12, and he wrote the general preface for the first edition, 1911, and the revised edition of 1920. In 1900, Suematsu was given the important post of Minister of the Interior in Ito's 4th and last cabinet, 1900 to 1901. He also became a member of the Standing Committee of the Seiyukai, the party formed that year by Ito and prescribed the nascent Socialist Party. When asked why he had done this, he replied that Japan must suppress the troublesome party, just as other countries were doing. In the same year, he was appointed to the Imperial Household Ministry. sent to England, 1904 to 1906. During the Russo-Japanese War, Suematsu was, partly on his own recommendation, sent to England to influence European opinion, combat the Kaiser's mischievous Yellow Peril doctrine, and plead Japan's case as Harvard-educated Kaneko Kentaro, 1853 to 1942, was sent to America. So there were two missions in parallel, Kaneko's and Suematsu's. It was, as he wrote to Ito on the 9th of February 1904, a mission with quite a few extremely delicate points. Suematsu left Japan on the 10th of February, 2 days after the war broke out, with a letter of introduction in English from Ito to Lord Lansdowne, the British Foreign Secretary. This spoke of Suematsu's revisiting England for health reasons and described Russia's high-handed march towards hegemony as a serious menace to the safety of weaker states. Suematsu traveled via Washington, where he met President Theodore Roosevelt, who sympathized with Japan and detested the Russians. In 1905, 2 books by Suematsu appeared. The Risen Sun, the title was suggested by the British publisher Archibald Constable and Co., and A Fantasy of Far Japan, or Summer Dream Dialogues. The former is the more important, being mainly a collection of actual speeches and essays from this period in 3 parts. The latter is a series of imaginary dialogues about Japan, mostly in the salons of rich and beautiful Parisian ladies, which Suematsu claimed were based on actual conversations he held in the summer of 1905. In the preface to Fantasy, he apologizes for the polemic tone and states, "In publishing this volume, I am not in the least degree actuated by a desire to exalt my country unduly, still less to boast about her achievements. My sole aim has been to show Japan as she is." In the preface to Risen Sun, written at Queen Anne's Mansions, Westminster in August 1905, Suematsu acknowledges 6 benefactors: Murakami Bussan, Dr. Thomas Waraka, who taught him English, Roman and international law at Cambridge, Mr. Ernest Schuster, who taught him German law, and the 3 Choshu elder statesmen, Ito, Inoue, and Yamagata, who had entrusted me with many important tasks, political or otherwise. The postscript, added in Paris on the 1st of September 1905, just before the Treaty of Portsmouth, New Hampshire, was signed, claims that Japan has shown a great moral heroism in the cause of humanity and civilization, and that she has maintained her ambition of deserving the name of a civilized nation. No longer, Suematsu concluded, could Japan be looked down upon by many as petty, infantile, imitative, shallow, bellicose, and aggressive nation, as a petty, etc. nation. Japan had emphatically confirmed her joining the Comity of Nations and now aspired to great power status. The first part of the book, antecedent to the war, contains a searing indictment of the Machiavellian Russian diplomacy, 1895 to 1905, which Suematsu claims provoked the conflict. Suematsu quotes official British and Japanese sources in detail, bringing with the Russian-originated text of the notorious Russo-Franco-German triple intervention of 1895, couched in terms of severe friendship and advising Japan to renounce the definitive possession of the Liaotsung Peninsula, which Russia coveted. Only 3 years later, Russia obtained a lease of the ice-free Port Arthur and Dalny in the peninsula after Germany obtained a lease of Kiao in 1897. In July 1900, Russia submitted notes to the powers, including Japan, in which she stated certain fundamental principles designed to preserve China and prevent partition. But she was the very power that did most to frustrate them by occupying Manchuria and its treaty port of New Chuang, and seized the British-owned Peking-New Chuang Railway. Later, Russia did all she could to delay her withdrawal from Northeast Asia, with prevarication and demands that no other power should replace her. Russian policy and action is characterized with extreme frankness by Suematsu as devious, reckless, high-handed, cynical, even cloven-hoofed. Russian armies were guilty of barbarity, that's in inverted commas, and massacres of Chinese civilians. For example, on the south bank of the river Amur, opposite Blagoveshchensk in July 1900. Japanese soldiers at Port Arthur in November 1894 had matched their cruelty, though Suematsu's account begins after the Sino-Japanese War of 1894 to 95. Suematsu also robustly, if controversially, defended Japan against the accusation of a surprise attack against Russia based on 19th century precedents that a formal declaration is not needed to constitute a state of war. Indeed, there was no prior declaration of war by either side. The second part of the book, A Nation in Training, deals with such topics as the training of soldiers, education of women, harakiri, ethics, religions, and Emperor Meiji's determined but amiable character. On the Japanese character, Suematsu says astutely that there is no shame in being a nation of imitators because civilization is only an accumulation of imitation. What would Europe be without Greek culture, Roman law, and the Judeo-Christian tradition? Some of his views now seem outdated or naive. For example, his refusal to accept that parents could ever be cruel to their children in Japan. That's page 141. The third part, External Relations, includes a lengthy historical paper on China, which he describes as essentially Pacific, her conquests and growth being due to the influence of her culture. Suematsu also defends the Japanese treatment of Russian prisoners of war at Matsuyama, Shikoku, as gentlemanly, based on Buddhism and Bushido, and in accordance with the Geneva and Hague Conventions. He expresses confidence that in the future, his bête noire, the discredited yellow peril paranoia as manifested in the Triple Intervention, will be dismissed as a passing fantasy, whether in economic or military guise. Perhaps fortunately, he did not live long enough to witness the rise of Japanese militarism in the 1930s. In Japan, 1906 to 1920. Suematsu returned to Japan in time to attend a luncheon, that's a formal lunch, on the 16th of March 1906 of the Cambridge and Oxford Society of Japan, the so-called Kengyukai, at which he sat next to Lord Redesdale, A.B. Mitford, who described him in his Garter mission to Japan, Macmillan 1906, as brilliant and famous all over Europe, after his lectures, letters to the Times, and other publications. Suematsu was made a privy councillor, that's Sumitsu-in Komonkan, in the same year, and was also in time to see Ito before his departure to become resident general in Korea. In 1907, he became tutor to the newly installed Korean Crown Prince Yi Yun, a member of the Imperial Academy and a Viscount. When Ito was assassinated by An Chung-gun at Harbin Station on the 26th of October 1909, Suematsu published several eulogies of his father-in-law. From 1912 to 1920, he was in semi-retirement, though he continued to be active as a privy councillor and to work on the Bocho Kaitenshi, while also translating classical commentaries on Roman law. Suematsu was still politically active when he died at home in Shiba, Tokyo, of influenza complicated by chronic pleurisy on the 5th of November 1920, 3 days after illness struck during a Privy Council meeting. Concluding remarks. Suematsu Kencho was an intellect of great versatility, ambition, and patriotism, whose achievements have not been properly recognized, partly because of their jack-of-all-trades diversity, and partly because of criticism by Shiba Ryotaro. He made significant efforts to introduce Japanese culture to a Western audience and to bring Western drama and literature to Japan. As an eloquent advocate for Japan in Britain and Europe during the Russo-Japanese War, which involved unprecedented manpower and technology in a full-scale East-West confrontation, Suematsu was both powerful and persuasive, though assisted by the pre-existing Anglo-Japanese alliance and his Cambridge connections. Sometimes his passionate and frank outspokenness invited criticism and imperiled his political and bureaucratic careers, but he apparently never lost the support of his indulgent patrons. Suematsu's wit, intelligence, sincerity, and charm may well have been his saving graces in their eyes. And that is the end of this chapter from this book. So Suematsu Kencho attended Cambridge University and did various pioneering things, including the first partial translation of the Genji Monogatari, the Tale of Genji. Okay, so I think that's all for now. Thank you very much for listening and watching if you have been. Goodbye for now.